energy healing is working. It's stopping the spread of pancreatic cancer when nothing else that we know of can stop pancreatic cancer, at least that I know of. It's one of the hardest cancers to reduce, diminish, reverse. And here in a lab, energy healing is working on pancreatic cells in petri dishes.
Would you say you've made peace in some way with the mystery of consciousness, that there's some mystery here that perhaps we're not going to be able to nail down and define in every way that we want? Or are you on a search to get answers to how some of these things work, or both?
I think it's both. I mean, I do fully believe now that consciousness is fundamental. We've grown up in a paradigm which is materialism, which says that what is real can be measured and observed. And I think we did a huge disservice to ourselves of human beings when we cut off from the belief that the non-physical world is active and real in our lives. And if you look back at a lot of native folks from all over the world, that was part and parcel of existence. And it was helpful. It was quite helpful. So I think understand and how does this stuff become possible, is if consciousness is fundamental. And if that sounds like, what does that mean? This idea, the materialist world, a lot of it's right. A lot of it is right. But basically it's that these building blocks of our world, which are physics and math and biology and psychology, and at the tippy top of that is consciousness. And all those other things created consciousness. And our brain created it. And every little layer of the pyramid there for materialism, I think, is pretty correct. We don't want to toss out the textbooks. But if you take that tippy top of consciousness and put it on the bottom of the triangle, then consciousness becomes fundamental. Consciousness is the baseline that everything else is built upon. And it's not that hard to think about if you actually just start thinking that every single thing in your room, in my room, on your body, in your home, started as a thought first. It wasn't here. It was all thought first. Everything in our physical reality, Wi-Fi, any of it, was a thought first. The only thing that wasn't is the earth that we're standing on, unless that was someone else's thought. So if consciousness is fundamental, then it's not hard to believe that our bodies are dividing up our little singular unified things of consciousness into little beings that can operate and explore the world. But really, when all said and done, it's like we're drops in an ocean kind of, and this ocean is consciousness. And that would make something like telepathy or clairvoyance or remote viewing possible, because we can operate, or seeing through a blindfold possible. So I don't think that we have the whys yet, but I think we will. Just like we couldn't explain what a rainbow was for years. It was a promise from God, and then we could explain it. I think many of these things that feel mystical and magical, we find out how they operate and how they work. The other thing that's really interesting is the amount of, I think, high-profile individuals who are much smarter than I, who really on the cutting edge of technology and things like that, science, who have been telling me about some of the stuff they're pondering and questioning. And one of these individuals, I know he's funded consciousness labs all over the world, big in tech, big in funding consciousness research. And he's got a theory that we're trying to have him on the Talk Tracks, but he's pretty private. The Talk Tracks is our between seasons show where we kind of unpack things. That psi, which is quote, we talk about that in telepathy, PSI psi, which might be clairvoyance or telepathy or psychokinesis or remote viewing. Some of these abilities, he thinks they're kind of shy, and he doesn't know if they're built that way. But often, like when you see them out of the gate, it's really repetitive and powerful and promising, and sometimes they wane if you're asked to do them or capture them or test them. Through the Telepathy film, we have successfully captured, it's going to be in the film, like telepathy happening in a very controlled setting, which is exciting, through triple blind trials with a whole team of scientists, all sorts of stuff like that, which is great. But when you try to capture and document this stuff too much, it can kind of get a little difficult to do. And this man believes that that's part of the nature of it, that it kind of keeps the mystery alive. Like we have to have a little bit about that in our world. So who knows? But we're going to keep exploring it.
You mentioned that in our human history previously, people who lived closer to the earth would naturally have some of these capacities of being in an alive world, sensing the living power of nature and listening to precognitive dreams, that kind of thing,
Mhm,
that we could look back and how in modern left brain focused times that can be shut down. And one of my curiosities is not just seeing that these are latent abilities that were in us and expressed previously, but where we're going,
mhm.
that we're in a very interesting moment right now. And your work as a filmmaker at the intersection with social change, you've moved forward, if you will, this conversation in a really powerful way, that there's some future that's coming. And I think it's not that far away, actually. This is really my feeling that we're in a sort of breakthrough period. And I might even say a breakthrough couple of decades here where there is going to be a shift in our recognition of our human capacities. And I wonder if you see that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I think that, again, the best thing that I've seen in the past year was that my hope all along was just that science and research would start putting more time and money into this stuff. It shouldn't be the onus shouldn't be on the average person or a storyteller to figure out that, it should be on the scientists. And I think for a long time, the spirit of inquiry has been taken away from scientists. You couldn't even ask questions about the non-physical world and be taken seriously. You'd be mocked, you'd be ridiculed, couldn't find funding for it, forget tenure. You couldn't get published even if you were doing incredible research that was peer reviewed and airtight. And that's really unfortunate because the spirit of inquiry should be what is the lifeline of science. And I've seen that with the telepathy tips too. I mean, this is like, it is documented all over the world from so many different sources. Like, you know, it was as thorough an effort as it could be. And someone will still try to, discount it, debunk it. And that's okay. That's okay. But what I wanted was that for science, just to unleash some money or some freedom to let scientists look at this. And over the past year, it's been wonderful because I've been hearing from teams of researchers, again, showing that energy healing is working. It's stopping the spread of pancreatic cancer when nothing else that we know of can stop pancreatic cancer, at least that I know of. It's one of the hardest cancers to reduce, diminish, reverse. And here in a lab, energy healing is working on pancreatic cells in petri dishes. That is remarkable. That is groundbreaking news. And what does that mean? What the heck does that mean? The fact that scientists found something in our body, some people even call it an organ that we didn't know was there before called the interstitium, which seems to bring information around to all the different cells in our body, which seems to map the meridians and many of the points that acupuncturists have been talking about for thousands of years. And, acupuncture, certainly by Western scientists, was mocked and saw as silly and whatever. Well, here we have a wonderful system in our body that was accidentally discovered by scientists in New York that is very real and shows that there's electromagnetism in our body that creates what was the equivalent of just chakras throughout us. I mean, that's remarkable, and then I know about the telepathy research being done, and it's pretty astounding because now when you talk to the scientists on the front cutting edge of it, they don't ask if it's happening. They're saying how many different types because it doesn't seem to be one type. It seems to be two types. There seems to be this close proximity telepathy that might be more a way of survival when your other senses are failing you, sort of like the non-speakers with apraxia have. And there also seems to be this more common telepathy, which happens due to extreme need or love or closeness from a far, far, far apart distance. Um, and it's involuntary. You can't control when it happens. It's usually happening because someone you love is in peril or needs you. And that's been reported throughout hundreds of years. And then the scientists are thinking, but maybe that's two different types of telepathy. And maybe the first one, the one that happens in close proximity, maybe that's happening through biophotons, these little bits of light in our cells, that happen through the mitochondria. And then you look over to the energy healing world and they're talking about the same thing. We think there might be two different types of energy healing. One has to do with energy close up. Maybe it has to do with biophotons. We're looking into that. The other type seems to be different. It goes over a distance. It often requires, it's based on need. We don't know yet how that's working. Maybe it's scalar waves. We don't know. There's a lot of controversial, strange things that seem fringe right now that could turn out to be real later. And so what's interesting to me is that watching that the scientists in these different realms studying different things are coming up with the same problems, the same questions, the same um, kind of running into the same things, which make you wonder, what the heck are we dealing with if it's operating the same ways, you know? And again, I think it's the fundamental layer of consciousness.
I wanna pick up on just one, comment you made because I've never heard of the interstitium. I've
Hmm.
never heard of that before. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think if people are very interested, they should look into the telepathy tapes season 2. I think it's episodes 8 and 9, um, which is where we look into the interstitium. It was discovered by a group of scientists in New York. They were testing um, basically a camera, you know, and people for a long time thought that there was just cracks inside of cells because when you took them out of your body, it was collagen, and collagen dries, and oops, there's the crack. Well, it turned out, no, there's a system of basically like fluid connecting all the cells and organs and systems in our body. And that system is bigger than our cardiovascular system. And it's called interstitium. And it was a big deal in the world of medicine. And, when the doctors who kind of discovered this were taking it around and saying, hey, this is amazing. And here's our research and here's the data, you know, in the Eastern world, people were saying, yes, we've been talking about that for thousands of years, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. We know that system's there. Like, yes, now you see it and you can talk about it and you have proof of it, but we've known it was there all along. Um, and so I highly encourage people to listen to our two-part energy healing episodes in season 2 to learn more, because the scientists will do a much better job explaining it than I will. But it's a huge breakthrough, and it really changes what the conversation around how something like energy healing could be possible.